Brandon Matthews was known as the terror of the school. As he prowled the cafeteria looking for a new victim, he headed toward quiet Emily Parker's table. When he swept her books to the floor, something changed in Emily's eyes. Within 10 seconds, Brandon would realize he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The cafeteria at Westfield High was particularly noisy on Thursday afternoons. With excitement at its peak before tomorrow's big football game, team spirit was at its highest. Colorful posters hung on the walls, with "Westfield Wolves will win" decorating everywhere. The cafeteria was like a living map of the high school hierarchy. Just beside the entrance door, the popular kids, cheerleaders, football team players, and rich kids occupied their large, privileged tables. In the middle section sat drama club students, science Olympiad team, and music band members. Toward the back corners were squeezed those who preferred to be invisible, the quiet, boring, or weird labeled students. Brandon Matthews was undisputedly the king of Westfield. At 18, standing 6'3" with broad shoulders, sharp jawline, and blue eyes, he was the star quarterback of the school's football team. He was expected to lead his team to victory once again in tomorrow's big game. 3 consecutive championships had given him an almost untouchable status. Teachers ignored his tardiness, turned a blind eye when he cheated on exams, and didn't punish him when he broke disciplinary rules. This power and privilege had fed the worst aspects of Brandon's character, reinforcing his bullying tendency that had existed since childhood. He walked the school corridors like a king, targeting anyone he perceived as weaker, feeding on the laughter of his sycophants around him. He always had 2 loyal companions by his side. Derek Johnson, Brandon's right-hand man, another star of the football team, was the spoiled son of a wealthy family. Mike Sullivan was the smartest of the trio, the strategist, who did Brandon's homework and constantly got him out of trouble. The 3 were known as Matthews and his guards. Some students would do anything to hang out with them. Others would change direction when they saw them in the corridor. In the farthest corner of the cafeteria, at a blue plastic table, Emily Parker sat alone. The 17-year-old Emily had transferred from New York about 2 years ago with her family. She was of average height, slim build, with brown hair and glasses. She usually wore simple clothes, jeans, basic t-shirts, plain cardigans. But what really made her inconspicuous was her ability to be almost invisible. During her 2 years at Westfield, Emily hadn't made a single friend, hadn't joined any clubs, had only spoken in class when asked. Even teachers sometimes didn't notice her. Emily's invisibility seemed like a conscious choice. She avoided eye contact, walked along the walls and corridors, and always chose the back rows in class. However, Emily's GPA was one of the highest in the school. She had an extraordinary talent in physics and mathematics. Her teachers thought she could get into prestigious schools like MIT or Caltech, if only she were a bit more social. Emily's only visible passion was the science and philosophy books and magazines she constantly carried. Today, too, she sat at her table with her physics book, several scientific magazines, and the small black notebook she always kept with her. While Brandon was joking with his friends at the popular kids' table, his gaze fell on the solitary figure in the corner of the cafeteria. "Hey," he suddenly said, turning to Mike and Derek. "Do you see that weird girl in the corner?" Derek and Mike turned their gaze to Emily. "Ah, the quiet one," said Derek. "Parker, Emily, I think her name is. Have you ever had fun with her?" Brandon asked, with a dangerous glint in his eyes. Mike frowned. "No, I mean, she's just someone who keeps to herself. She doesn't bother anyone." "That's even better," said Brandon, grinning. "I'm curious about her reaction. I haven't even heard her speak." "I don't know, man," said Mike hesitantly. "The big game is tomorrow. Maybe it's best not to cause trouble today." Brandon's eyes narrowed. "Are you scared, Sullivan?" "No, just what? She's a small, quiet girl. What can she do?" Derek patted Brandon on the shoulder. "Come on, boss. Let's have some fun. Maybe she'll finally cry and run away from school, like that other new girl. Remember? Allie or whatever?" Brandon grinned. "Allison. Yeah, she barely lasted a week." He stood up, his broad shoulders pulled back, his gaze locked on Emily. "Let's go." As the trio crossed the center of the cafeteria, conversations began to die down. Other students had realized that Brandon and his crew had selected a new target. Some watched with curiosity. Some looked uncomfortable. Most were just grateful that they weren't the targets. Emily, meanwhile, appeared completely absorbed in a Richard Feynman article on quantum electrodynamics, seemingly disconnected from the world around her. She didn't even notice the increasing silence in the cafeteria, the approaching footsteps, the gazes directed at her. Or perhaps she had noticed but chose to ignore them. Brandon stood in front of Emily's table, crossed his arms over his chest. For a moment he studied the girl, Her small, delicate hands, her carefully tied brown hair, her head bent over the magazine. Then he rolled up the sleeves of his t-shirt, leaned on the table and cleared his throat. Emily didn't react. "Hey," said Brandon, tapping lightly on the table. "I'm talking to you." Emily continued reading, turning the page. Derek and Mike looked at each other. This was an unexpected reaction, or lack thereof. Usually Brandon's targets immediately fell into fear and panic. Brandon's face reddened slightly. He hated being ignored. "Hey, are you deaf?" he asked, his voice beginning to rise. Emily finally raised her head, her eyes meeting Brandon's. Behind her glasses, her brown eyes looked cold and calm. "Yes," she said, her voice flat and expressionless. "What are you doing here all alone?" Brandon asked with a mocking smile. "Don't you have any friends, weird girl?" Emily briefly looked at Brandon, then at Derek and Mike, then at the curious crowd gathered around them. "I'm reading," she said simply, "and I would prefer not to be disturbed." A few gasps of surprise were heard. No one would speak to Brandon Matthews like that. Brandon's smile disappeared. His jaw tightened. "What did you say?" "I would prefer to be left alone," said Emily, in the same calm tone. "I have things I need to study." Brandon looked at Emily's books. "Oh, look at this. Do we have a little genius among us? What is this, quantum physics?" He picked up the book and flipped through its pages. "Do you really understand this?" Emily reached for her book. "Please give that back." "What if I don't want to?" said Brandon, holding the book up in the air. "What are you going to do about it, Parker? Report me to the teachers?" A flicker of emotion crossed Emily's face for the first time. Slight discomfort, perhaps impatience. "I just want my book back." "I'm sorry," said Brandon with fake regret, "but I don't understand." Maybe. With one motion, he swept the book and magazines to the floor. Papers scattered everywhere. Emily's notebook fell open to the floor. "Oops. How clumsy of me." There was a silence in the cafeteria. Everyone was waiting for Emily's reaction, her crying, shouting, or running away. These were the typical reactions of Brandon's victims. But Emily didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't run away. She slowly stood up, looked into Brandon's eyes. The expression in her eyes had changed. There was no longer just cold calmness, but also a determined focus. "Pick up my books and apologize," said Emily, her voice low but certain. The students in the cafeteria froze in shock. Even Derek and Mike looked uncomfortable. This was an unpredictable, unexpected reaction. Brandon laughed. "What did you say? Are you giving me orders?" Emily didn't move from her spot. "I'm giving you one more chance. Pick up my books and apologize," she said in the same calm voice. Brandon looked at the crowd around him, then back at Emily. "You really don't know who you're talking to, do you, little lady? I'm Brandon Matthews. No one tells me what to do in this school." Emily just waited, her gaze unwavering on Brandon. The expression of amusement on Brandon's face slowly transformed into anger. No one, especially not a small, quiet girl, could challenge him like this. He put his hand on Emily's shoulder and pushed her roughly. "Look, you little—" Brandon couldn't finish his sentence. Emily's hand moved like lightning, too fast to be seen. In a second, she had caught Brandon's wrist, twisted it slightly, and at the same time used her own body weight to break Brandon's balance. It was an extremely graceful movement, almost like a dance, non-violent but definitive. Brandon suddenly found himself on his knees, his hand twisted backward, his face contorted with pain. The movement was so fast, so unexpected, that neither Derek and Mike nor the surrounding crowd could fully understand what had happened. "What?" Brandon gasped in pain. "What are you doing?" As Emily continued to hold Brandon's wrist in a controlled manner, she said, "I asked you nicely. Now you're going to pick up my books and apologize." Brandon's face contorted with a mixture of shock and pain. "Let me go. You're hurting me." Emily twisted Brandon's arm a little more. The movement was so subtle that someone watching from the outside would hardly notice, but the expression on Brandon's face told the whole story. "Pick up my books and apologize," said Emily, emphasizing each word. Derek and Mike took a step forward to help their friend, but Emily's gaze directed at them stopped both. There was a clear warning in that look. "Don't." Brandon felt real fear for the first time in his life. The most powerful student at Westfield, the football star, the untouchable king, now on his knees in pain before a small, quiet girl. This wasn't an advantage given by amateur luck. Emily knew exactly what she was doing. "Okay, okay," Brandon shouted. "I'll do it. Just let me go." Emily released his wrist, and Brandon immediately took a deep breath, rubbing his wrist. For a moment, there was a tense silence between them. Brandon on the ground, Emily standing, just a few inches between them. But the power dynamic had completely changed. The entire cafeteria was watching with bated breath. Brandon Matthews, once the most feared bully of the school, was now kneeling before a girl. The world had turned upside down. Brandon began to pick up Emily's books and magazines from the floor, his hands still trembling. Physics book, science magazines, and black notebook, he carefully arranged them all on the table. Then he cleared his throat and looked at Emily. I'm sorry, said Brandon, his voice much quieter than usual. Emily nodded. Thank you. Now go and don't bother anyone else. Brandon got up, still rubbing his wrist. Derek and Mike had come to his side, both in shock, seemingly not knowing what to do. Brandon looked at Emily for a moment, his eyes filled with mixed emotions, anger, fear, surprise, and perhaps a touch of respect. This isn't over, said Brandon, but the threat was hollow and everyone knew it. Emily took her book and began reading again, as if nothing had happened. It is over, Brandon. Now go. As Brandon, Derek, and Mike left the cafeteria, applause broke out. First one person, then another, then more. In a short time, the entire cafeteria was applauding. For everyone who had been subjected to Brandon Matthews' bullying for years or watched in fear, this was a kind of collective catharsis. Emily didn't even raise her head, just continued reading as if all that applause wasn't for her. By the end of lunch break, rumors had spread to every corner of the school. The quiet girl took down Brandon Matthews. Did you see how she twisted his arm? Brandon looked like he was going to cry. Who is this girl? Emily Parker came from New York 2 years ago. Is she really some kind of ninja? Students in Emily's last class gave her secret glances, some whispering with admiration. But Emily sat quietly in the back row as usual, taking her notes. Suddenly becoming famous didn't seem to have caused any change in her behavior. However, there was a small change that even her teachers noticed. Emily's posture was straighter, her gaze more determined. It was as if an invisible weight she had been carrying for years had been lifted from her shoulders. After the last class, as she made her way down the corridor, a small crowd gathered around Emily. Students were directing questions at her, wanting to meet her, but Emily was still shy and distant. She gave short answers, avoiding eye contact. Finally, Sophia Rodriguez, the head of the school newspaper club, managed to drive the others away and caught Emily alone. Hey, Emily. Wait a minute, please, said Sophia excitedly. Can I talk to you? Emily hesitated, then nodded slightly. Sure. About what happened in the cafeteria today. It was incredible. How did you take down Brandon Matthews like that? Where did you learn those moves? Emily smiled slightly, adjusting her glasses. I've been practicing Aikido since I was 5. My father taught me. Aikido? What's that? Japanese martial art. It teaches you to use the attacker's energy and balance against them. It doesn't involve violence, just control. Sophia's eyes lit up. Wow, that's amazing. Could I do an interview with you for the school newspaper? I'm thinking of a headline like The Silent Hero, the girl who stood up to bullying. Emily looked uncomfortable. I'm not a hero, Sophia. I just defended myself. But Brandon was the worst bully in the school. No one dared to stand up to him. You did it, and now everyone— Sophia paused, noticing Emily's uncomfortable expression. You really don't want to be the center of attention, do you? Emily nodded slightly. I prefer to keep to myself. Crowds and attention, they make me uncomfortable. I understand. Sophia thought for a moment. What about an anonymous interview? We won't reveal your identity, but we'll share your story and information about Aikido. Maybe it will inspire other students. Emily thought about this. Maybe we can talk about it, but I have to go now. Sure, of course, said Sophia, handing Emily a piece of paper. This is my number. You can call me anytime. Emily took the paper, put it in her bag, and walked away. When she reached the school exit, she encountered an unexpected surprise. Brandon Matthews was waiting alone by the stairs. Emily hesitated. For a moment she felt a worry, perhaps Brandon had gathered his friends for revenge. But there was no one around, and Brandon's face no longer had that familiar arrogant expression. His shoulders were slumped. He looked insecure. Emily, said Brandon, his voice much calmer than usual. Can we talk? Emily approached cautiously. About what? About today? I really apologize for what I did. I just wanted to scare you. But Brandon paused, as if searching for the right words. You were right. I was a bully, and that's unacceptable. Emily waited silently, allowing Brandon to continue. I wasn't always like this, said Brandon, looking down. I was bullied in middle school, constantly. I was fat back then and wore glasses. I would go home crying from school every day. Emily's face softened. What changed? I started doing sports before high school. I lost weight, got contact lenses, and I swore that I would never feel weak and vulnerable again. Brandon sighed. I guess being a bully felt better than being bullied. Power changed me. You can't ease your own pain by hurting others, Brandon, said Emily softly. I know, I understand now. Brandon looked hesitantly into Emily's eyes. How did you take me down today? That move, I'm an athlete. I'm strong, but you. Aikido doesn't use force, said Emily. It uses the attacker's own strength against them. I just redirected your energy. Brandon's eyes lit up with curiosity. That's very impressive. Would you, would you teach me Aikido? Just a few moves. Not to defend myself, but maybe it would help me become a better person. Emily was surprised. This was not something she had expected. She thought for a moment, then smiled slightly. Monday after school in the gym. Your first lesson. Brandon's face brightened. Really? Thank you, Emily. Really, thank you. Emily nodded and started walking. After a few steps, she turned and looked over her shoulder. And Brandon, don't bully anyone ever again. I promise, said Brandon. And this time, it was clear he meant it. The next day, Westfield Wolves beat their rivals 42-21. Brandon Matthews performed better than ever on the field, more focused, more disciplined, as if a weight had been lifted from him. After the game, as his teammates carried him on their shoulders, Brandon's eyes searched for Emily in the stands. The girl wasn't there, of course. She never came to sporting events. When Monday came, Brandon experienced great hesitation before going to the gym. What if Emily didn't come? What if this was a joke? What if Emily came with her friends to humiliate him? But Emily was there, sitting cross-legged alone in the center of the gym floor. She was wearing a simple black tracksuit. Hello, said Brandon hesitantly. Emily nodded. Welcome. Take off your shoes and come onto the mat. Brandon did as he was told, feeling a bit strange. The girl facing him was at least a foot shorter than him and probably weighed half as much, yet he felt strangely vulnerable in front of her. The foundation of Aikido is balance and energy, Emily began. The stronger the attacker, the more energy we have to use. In Aikido, our aim is not to fight, but to end the conflict. For an hour, Emily patiently showed Brandon basic stances and simple techniques. Brandon had always been athletic and had good coordination, but this was a completely different system of movement, based not on power, but on balance and timing. When the lesson ended, Brandon was soaked in sweat, but there was a strange peace inside him. This is really amazing, he said to Emily. Thank you. Emily smiled slightly. Same time on Wednesday? Brandon nodded. Definitely. That evening at home, lying on his bed staring at the ceiling, Brandon felt truly good about himself for the first time in his life, not just with his successes on the football field, but at peace with himself. Perhaps real power lay not in hurting others, but in helping them. Within 2 weeks, Brandon and Emily's weekly Aikido lessons had transformed into a kind of student club. Brandon had invited some students he had once bullied, and Emily had convinced her quiet, introverted friends to join. On Mondays and Wednesdays after school, the sound of soft steps and respectful greetings could be heard from the gym. Westfield High was slowly changing. Brandon no longer pushed smaller students in the corridors. Instead, he made way for them, sometimes even greeting them. Derek and Mike were surprised at first, but over time they adapted to the new Brandon. Derek even attended a few Aikido lessons, though he wouldn't admit it to anyone. Emily was still mostly quiet, but she was no longer completely alone. At lunch, there were now several students at her table. Kids from the Aikido club, former bullying victims, and even Sofia Rodriguez. Emily rarely joined the conversation, but she was now fully present in the moment. Her eyes were no longer constantly in her books. Occasionally, she looked at her friends. Sophia had taken Emily's suggestion into account and written an article titled The Invisible Art, Martial Arts Against School Bullying. Emily wasn't named in the article, but the philosophy and principles of Aikido were explained in detail. The article was published not only in the school newspaper but also in the local paper, receiving great interest. A month later, Ms. Reynolds, the school principal, called Emily to her office. Emily, said Ms. Reynolds with a warm smile, I called you here to talk about the Aikido club. Emily was surprised. The Aikido club? We're not an official club, just a few students meeting in the gym. That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you, said Ms. Reynolds. Recently, we've observed a significant decrease in disciplinary incidents at the school. Bullying complaints have almost completely stopped, and from what I hear from the teachers, your unofficial club has played a major role in this change. Emily blushed slightly. I'm just showing a few moves. What's really important is that students learn to see themselves and others with respect. That's exactly why, said Miss Reynolds, I want you to establish and lead the school's official Aikido club. With an official budget, proper mats, and equipment, what do you say? Emily's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just a student. You're not just a student, Emily. You've created real change in this school. Miss Reynolds pulled out a form from her desk. I've already got approval from your father. He seemed very proud. Emily hesitated. All her life she had avoided drawing attention to herself. But now, maybe the time had come. Time to open herself a little more to the world, to share her talents with others. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. Miss Reynolds smiled. Great, and there's one more thing. The State Department of Education is organizing a conference on combating bullying in schools next month. They want to invite you as a speaker. The shocked expression on Emily's face made Miss Reynolds laugh. Don't worry, Brandon will be speaking with you. Together you can represent both sides of bullying, from the perspective of both the victim and the bully. When she returned home that evening, Emily felt different than usual. All her life she had preferred to be invisible. She had grown up in a small town, been bullied in elementary school, and started Aikido to learn to protect herself. Her father ran a small Aikido dojo. Emily was his best student. When they moved to New York and then to Westfield, Emily had continued to hide herself. She didn't want to attract attention. She didn't want to belong to any social group. She had planned to just quietly finish high school, studying her lessons and reading the books she loved. But now maybe the time had come. Time to make her voice heard, to share her talents, to make a real difference in the world. When she entered her father's dojo, Adam Parker greeted his daughter with a smile at the door. How did it go? He asked. Emily smiled, really smiled. Good, Dad, really good. 2 months later, the board in the Westfield High gym was decorated with the words Aikido Club, Balance, Respect, Harmony. Emily was showing basic stances to about 30 students in the dojo, which now had professional mats and equipment. Among them were Brandon Matthews, Derek Johnson, Sophia Rodriguez, and many other students who had previously been in different layers of the social hierarchy. In Aikido, the goal is not to win, but to end conflict, said Emily, her voice now stronger, more confident. We take the attacker's energy, direct it, and break their balance. But in doing so, we don't harm them. The goal is peace and harmony. Brandon was paired with Derek, practicing a technique. This was something unimaginable 2 months ago. The school's 2 bully leaders, now bowing to each other with respect and practicing Aikido techniques. Brandon was listening carefully to Emily's instructions, trying to apply the movements with precision. At the end of the class, as Emily bid farewell to her students with the traditional Japanese bow, Brandon came to her side. Emily, he said, are you ready for the state conference? It's this weekend, right? Emily nodded. Yes, I'm a bit nervous, but I think I'm ready. Me too, said Brandon. But we'll do it together, right? Just like we changed everything together. Emily smiled. Yes, together. That weekend, in the conference hall of the State Department of Education, Emily and Brandon took the stage side by side. The hall was full. Teachers, administrators, education experts, and student representatives had come to listen to them. Emily approached the microphone, took a deep breath. Hello, my name is Emily Parker. Until 2 months ago, I was the most invisible student at my school. Brandon stepped forward. And I'm Brandon Matthews. Until 2 months ago, I was the most feared bully at my school. Together, they told their story. Emily described what it was like to stay silent, to be invisible for years. Brandon explained what it was like to project his inner pain onto others, to chase the illusion of power. And together, they shared how that fateful day in the cafeteria had changed everything. Aikido taught me not just to defend myself, said Emily. It also taught me to accept my own power, to find my voice, and it taught me that real power lies not in hurting others but in helping them, added Brandon. At the end of their presentation, they received a standing ovation. Many school principals said they wanted to bring their program to their own schools. A publisher representative suggested turning their story into a book. But for Emily and Brandon, the most important thing was that there, on that stage, 2 former enemies could now stand side by side, creating change together. On the bus ride back to school, Emily was looking out the window. Her life had changed so much. She was no longer invisible, but this no longer bothered her, because she had discovered that when she became visible, she could make a real difference. Brandon sat next to her. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? Asked Emily. For changing my life, said Brandon. I know at first I bothered you, I threw your books on the floor, but you forgave me. You gave me a second chance, and that changed everything. Emily smiled. The first thing we learn in Aikido, Brandon, everyone can fall. What matters is getting up and trying again. When the bus stopped in front of Westfield High, the sun was about to set. Emily and Brandon walked toward the school with their friends. 2 months ago, when Brandon Matthews walked down the corridor, students would fearfully make way. Now students smiled at him, greeted him, and Emily Parker, once the most invisible student at the school, was now someone everyone knew and respected. Westfield High would perhaps always be what all high schools are: social groups, dramas, small injustices. But Brandon and Emily's story showed how even a small change, like a butterfly flapping its wings, could create great storms. Sometimes in life, the most unexpected encounters teach the most powerful lessons. Brandon Matthews thought he was choosing a victim, but he had actually encountered a teacher, and Emily Parker, just by defending herself, had changed a school. And perhaps most importantly, they had both found something in themselves they never expected: a true friendship. What did you learn from this story? Have you ever encountered bullying or been a bully? Share your experiences in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We'll be back every week with similar inspiring stories. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. Remember, true power is always within us,